Don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling stories. Collision. Lila adjusted her high heels nervously as she walked down the marble hallway of the luxurious corporate building. She had spent the past 3 years working in the same office, climbing the ladder quietly, blending into the background. But today, something felt different. There was a tension in the air, almost electric, and it had nothing to do with the usual office deadlines. Her eyes darted toward the glass doors of the executive suite. The man behind those doors, Damian Cross, was infamous, not just in the company, but in the city. Damian was the kind of man people whispered about. Handsome, sharply dressed, always in control, yet utterly heartless when it came to business. Lila had seen him in meetings, making deals that left competitors trembling and employees holding their breath. To everyone, he was untouchable. But to Lila, he was something more, a dangerous magnet she couldn't resist. She paused near the window, letting the morning sun catch her hair. "He's sexy but heartless," she whispered under her breath, almost as if saying it aloud would make it true. Her voice was soft, playful, a little teasing. She didn't even realize she had leaned slightly against the glass, lost in her thoughts about the enigma that was Damian Cross. What Lila didn't know was that behind her, in the reflection of the window, Damian was standing there. He had been observing her from the moment she entered the floor, curious about this assistant who seemed both timid and bold in the same breath. The corners of his lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smirk. "So," Damian's deep voice cut through the air, calm but with an edge that made Lila freeze, "you think I'm heartless?" Lila spun around, her heart hammering in her chest. She had expected a colleague to tease her, maybe even laugh, but not him. Damian Cross, taller, darker, more intimidating than she had ever imagined, was looking straight at her, his piercing blue eyes locking onto hers. Her mind went blank. Words she had rehearsed in front of the mirror didn't exist anymore. She started, but no sound came out. Damian stepped closer, each movement precise, deliberate. The soft click of his leather shoes against the marble floor was the only sound in the hall. Lila could feel the power emanating from him, a magnetic pull that made it impossible to step away. "I hear things," he said finally, his tone teasing, almost amused. "Whispers in the hallways. Little opinions about me. Funny, how honest people can be when they think no one's listening." Lila swallowed hard, her cheeks burning. She wanted to apologize, but something in Damian's presence held her in place. She realized, maybe for the first time, that he wasn't just a boss. He was a storm, beautiful, terrifying, and utterly irresistible. "Why you don't understand," she stammered. I mean," her words tumbled over each other in panic. Damian chuckled softly, a sound that was equal parts amusement and danger. He leaned slightly closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "I think I understand perfectly, Lila. But tell me, do you think the rest of the office knows what they're saying about me?" Lila shook her head, trying to gather her composure. I don't know. I didn't think." "You're brave," Damian interrupted, a faint smile touching his lips. "Most people would have kept their opinions to themselves. You, on the other hand, whispered yours in front of a window. Bold, or foolish? I haven't decided yet." Lila's heart raced. She hated that her body responded to him despite her mind screaming caution. He was dangerous, ruthless, and yet, she couldn't look away. Damian straightened up, his presence overwhelming yet strangely intoxicating. "Come with me," he said suddenly. "I want to show you something." Lila blinked, confused and nervous. Something?" "Yes. Something you won't forget," he replied, his voice dropping to a lower, almost intimate tone. The kind of tone that made her stomach flip and her pulse spike. She had two choices: run, as every logical part of her mind screamed, or follow. And before she could stop herself, her curiosity, her adrenaline, and some unspoken attraction guided her feet. She followed Damian down the hall, past the elevators, and into the heart of his office. The office was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. The early morning sun streamed in, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Damian moved to a sleek leather chair behind his desk and gestured for her to sit across from him. "Have a seat," he said casually, but his eyes never left her. Lila perched on the edge of the chair, acutely aware of the tension that hung between them. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Damian leaned back, steepling his fingers. "To see if you're as honest as you are bold. You called me heartless, do you still think that?" Lila hesitated. She could lie, she could explain herself, or she could run out of the office and never come back. But there was a strange honesty in her that demanded she answer. I think you're complicated," she admitted finally. "Not just heartless. You hide a lot behind that tough exterior." For a moment, Damian said nothing. Then, slowly, he smiled, a rare, real smile that reached his eyes and softened the hard lines of his face. "Good answer, Lila. Very good." Her heart skipped again. This was the moment she realized that Damian Cross was more than just a boss. He was a puzzle, a challenge, a man she couldn't stop thinking about. And somehow, despite herself, she wanted to know more. Little did she know, this was only the beginning. One whisper, one careless comment, had just pulled her into a world where nothing was as it seemed, and where Damian Cross ruled every corner of it. Lila barely noticed the time passing as she sat in Damian's office, her nerves tangled with a strange excitement she couldn't quite name. The city outside gleamed in the early morning sun, but inside, the air felt charged, like a storm waiting to break. Damian watched her quietly, leaning back in his chair with that unreadable expression that made her both nervous and curious. He was dangerous, yes, but there was something about the way he looked at her that made it impossible to think clearly. Her heartbeat was loud in her chest as she tried to maintain composure, but every second in his presence seemed to stretch, drawing her deeper into the tension that surrounded him. "You have questions, I can tell," Damian finally said, his voice smooth, almost teasing, yet carrying that undeniable authority that demanded attention. Lila hesitated, trying to gauge what was safe to ask, what might provoke him. She had no idea how much he already knew about her thoughts, her daydreams, even the little whispered comments she had made moments before. She swallowed hard and decided to test the waters carefully. Why are you letting me stay here? I mean, most people would have been scolded or ignored," she said, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her stomach. Damian's piercing gaze softened just slightly, though the intensity never left his eyes. "Because you're different, Lila. Bold, honest, unafraid to speak your mind even when it's risky. That's rare. Most people don't survive in this world if they lack caution, but you have fire." She felt her cheeks heat up at his words, both flattered and unnerved by the praise coming from a man like him. She wanted to be careful, to hold back, but part of her wanted to lean in, to find out just how far this dangerous allure could take her. Damian continued, his tone casual but laced with something deeper, something that made her pulse quicken. "You said I'm heartless. Do you still think that, after seeing me like this?" Lila hesitated. It was the question that had been forming in her mind since the hallway, since the whispered comment that had unknowingly summoned him. She thought about his reputation, the rumors that swirled through the office, the fear people whispered behind closed doors, and then about the man in front of her, tall, impeccably dressed, intimidating, yet oddly human. I don't know," she admitted finally, her voice quiet, almost a whisper. "Maybe not entirely. But you're complicated." Damian's rare smile returned, the one that softened his sharp features and revealed a glimpse of the man behind the corporate armor. "Complicated, huh? That's fair. Most people don't notice complexity. They only see what they fear." He leaned forward slightly, the intensity of his gaze pulling her in, making her stomach twist with anticipation. "And what about you, Lila? What do you see when you look at me?" She blinked, caught off guard by the sudden question. Her mind raced, unsure whether to answer truthfully or carefully. The truth, of course, was dangerous. She couldn't stop thinking about him, about the way he dominated the room with ease, about the magnetic pull that made her heart race and her thoughts scatter. "I see someone who's hard to read," she finally murmured, choosing her words with care. "Someone who doesn't give away everything, who keeps people guessing." Damian's smile widened, a subtle acknowledgement that he liked her honesty, her boldness, her willingness to speak even when it was risky. "Good answer," he said, his voice dropping to a softer, almost intimate tone that made her ears burn. I appreciate honesty, even when it's dangerous. The moment hung in the air, thick and charged. Lila felt a shiver run down her spine as she realized how close she was to crossing a line she couldn't come back from. How this dangerous, magnetic man held power over more than just the office. He had her attention, her curiosity, her imagination. Damian stood suddenly, walking around his desk with the kind of controlled, predatory grace that made her pulse jump. He stopped behind her chair, leaning slightly to look down at her, his presence overwhelming. "Tell me, Lila," he said, voice low, smooth, teasing, "are you brave enough to step further into my world? To see what it's really like behind the doors most people don't even dare to knock on?" She swallowed hard, her throat dry, heart racing in a rhythm she couldn't control. There was fear, yes, but also an undeniable thrill. I don't know," she whispered, almost to herself, caught between caution and curiosity. Damian's lips curved into a faint, approving smile. "Good. That hesitation. That's honesty. That's instinct. And instinct is what keeps people alive in my world. Fear and caution, they're necessary, but they can't hold you back entirely." He straightened, giving her a look that was both commanding and magnetic, one that made her feel exposed and alive all at once. Lila realized then that she was standing on the edge of something she couldn't fully understand, a world of power, intrigue, danger, and desire, and Damian Cross was the man at the center of it all. He moved back to his desk, signaling the end of their first unofficial meeting, yet she knew this was only the beginning. The air was thick with tension, electricity, and unspoken words. Lila left his office that morning with a mind racing, a heart pounding, and an undeniable sense that her life had just shifted in a way she couldn't take back. Every step down the marble hallway felt like a countdown to the next encounter, to the next challenge, to the next moment where she would have to confront not just Damian, but the dangerous attraction pulling her closer to him. She didn't know what lay ahead, didn't know the games he would play, the power he wielded, or the secrets he kept hidden behind that sharp, perfect exterior, but she knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. Every whisper, every glance, every unspoken thought between them had just begun, and the world of Damian Cross was about to sweep her up in ways she had never imagined. And as she left, the echo of his final words lingered in her mind, almost a promise and almost a warning. "Be ready, Lila, because once you step fully into my world, there's no turning back." The days that followed felt like walking on a tightrope for Lila. Every glance, every passing comment from her colleagues seemed charged with a hidden meaning she couldn't fully understand. She tried to focus on her work, typing reports, answering emails, and pretending that the conversation in Damian's office hadn't left her heart racing and her thoughts tangled in ways she couldn't control. But the truth was impossible to ignore. Damian Cross was everywhere in her mind, like a shadow she couldn't escape. Every time she caught sight of his reflection in a glass panel or heard his name whispered by a coworker, a thrill ran through her, equal parts excitement and fear. She had warned herself to stay professional, to keep a careful distance, but she was already tangled in the web he spun effortlessly. Then came the unexpected email, a digital invitation that made her pulse spike and her fingers tremble. The subject line was simple: dinner. Tonight. My office. 8 p.m. No signature, no explanation, just the unmistakable mark of Damian Cross. Lila stared at the screen for several long seconds, debating what to do. She knew this wasn't just a casual meeting or a simple discussion about work. Damian didn't do casual, and he certainly didn't waste his time. Curiosity warred with caution in her chest. This could be a test, a trap, or something far more complicated. But part of her, a dangerous, impulsive part she rarely let surface, knew she couldn't ignore it. By the time she finally typed back a cautious, "I'll be there," her heart was already racing uncontrollably. That evening, she spent hours agonizing over what to wear. Every outfit felt either too casual or too daring. She settled on a sleek black dress, elegant but not overly revealing, pairing it with simple heels and letting her hair fall in loose waves. The reflection staring back at her in the mirror was both nervous and strangely defiant, a combination that Damian would likely notice immediately. The elevator ride up to Damian's floor seemed impossibly long, each ding of the ascending numbers echoing in her mind like a countdown to something she couldn't fully predict. When she finally reached the top floor and stepped out into the dimly lit corridor outside his office, the smell of leather, polished wood, and subtle cologne hit her immediately. The door was slightly ajar, a silent invitation. She took a deep breath and stepped inside. Damian was already there, leaning casually against his desk, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a glass of red wine. The way he looked at her, calm, measured, but with that subtle spark of amusement in his eyes, made her knees weak before she even spoke. "You came," he said, voice low, smooth, teasing. "Good. I was hoping you would." Lila swallowed, trying to steady her breathing. I wasn't sure," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Damian took a step closer, the faint click of his shoes against the floor amplifying the tension in the room. "Most people wouldn't have," he said, voice dropping to that intimate, magnetic tone that made her stomach flip. "But you're curious. Bold. Honest. And that's exactly why I wanted you here." She forced herself to meet his gaze, though every instinct screamed caution. "Why me?" she asked, genuinely puzzled. Damian's lips curved into a small, calculating smile. "Because you see more than others. You notice details, subtleties, and you're not afraid to speak your mind, even when it's dangerous. That kind of honesty is rare." He gestured toward the chair across from him, and Lila obeyed, perching on the edge as she always seemed to in his presence. He poured a glass of wine for himself and, to her surprise, another for her. The scent of it was rich and intoxicating, much like the man before. "Her. Drink," he said casually. "It's a small gesture, a way to relax. Though I'm not sure anyone can really relax in my presence, can they?" Lila chuckled softly, a sound she barely recognized as her own. Maybe," she said, her fingers brushing the rim of the glass nervously. Damian watched her, his eyes tracking every subtle movement, every micro-expression. It was unnerving and thrilling all at once. "Tell me, Lila," he said, leaning slightly closer, "what do you think of me now? After the whisper, after the glance, after stepping into this room?" She hesitated. The truth was dangerous, complicated, and utterly undeniable. "I think you're unpredictable," she admitted finally, "and, maybe more than a little dangerous. But I can't stop thinking about you." The confession hung in the air like a spark ready to ignite a fire. Damian's smile deepened, and he set his glass down on the desk with deliberate care. "Good," he said simply. "I like honesty, and I like it when people aren't afraid of a little danger." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken tension, before he took a step back and gestured toward the city view behind him. "Look out there," he said. "All of this, the skyline, the deals, the power, it's nothing without someone willing to understand it. Someone willing to see the layers beneath the surface. That's why you're here, Lila. I don't bring people into my world lightly." She followed his gaze, the city lights stretching endlessly, feeling both insignificant and oddly central in his carefully controlled universe. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted, voice trembling slightly. "But I want to understand. I want to see." Damian's eyes gleamed with approval. "Exactly," he said. "Curiosity, bravery, desire. That's what separates the observers from the participants. And I prefer participants." The night stretched on, conversations weaving between professional and personal, teasing and testing, drawing Lila further into a world she had only glimpsed before. Every glance, every subtle movement, every word carried weight, leaving her simultaneously exhilarated and terrified. And yet, through it all, there was a strange sense of trust building between them, fragile, dangerous, electric. By the time she left his office, the night sky stretching endlessly over the city, Lila knew that nothing would ever feel ordinary again. The whisper in the hallway, the invitation, the dinner, they were all part of a carefully orchestrated game, one she hadn't realized she was already playing. And Damian, he was already 3 moves ahead, watching, calculating, pulling her into a world where every heartbeat mattered and every glance carried meaning. The thrill of the unknown, the dangerous allure of Damian Cross, and the undeniable pull between them had only just begun, and Lila knew with absolute certainty that this was only the first chapter of a story that would consume them both in ways she couldn't even imagine. The following week was a blur for Lila. Every time she entered the office, Damian's presence seemed to hang over her like an invisible weight, both thrilling and terrifying. She caught herself stealing glances at him across the floor, noticing the way his tailored suits emphasized his broad shoulders, the sharp intensity in his piercing blue eyes, and the confident way he moved through the space like he owned it, which, in truth, he did. But it wasn't just his power that held her attention, it was the mystery, the subtle unpredictability that made every interaction feel like a dangerous game she was both terrified and desperate to play. Emails, meetings, and phone calls blurred into background noise as she replayed their dinner in her mind again and again, the way he had studied her every reaction, the teasing tone in his voice. The way he had challenged her without ever revealing his full intentions. It was maddening, intoxicating, and impossible to ignore. Then, one late evening, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was simple and cryptic: "Meet me at the rooftop. Midnight." Lila froze. Her heart hammered. This could be Damian, she thought, but it could also be something else entirely: dangerous, reckless, unpredictable. Yet, she couldn't resist. There was a pull, a magnetic curiosity that had her slipping into her coat, her mind racing, her pulse soaring. She left the office quietly, careful not to alert anyone, and took the elevator to the top floor. The rooftop was eerily silent except for the distant hum of the city below. The night air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain from earlier that evening. And there, leaning casually against the glass railing, was Damian. The moonlight caught his features perfectly: strong jawline, smoldering eyes, and that faint, knowing smile that made her knees weak. "You came," he said, voice low, smooth, and filled with an almost dangerous amusement. "Of course," she replied, though her voice betrayed a tremor of nervous excitement. "I had to know who would send me a message like this." Damian stepped closer, closing the small distance between them, the faint scent of his cologne wrapping around her like a challenge she couldn't resist. "I did," he admitted, his voice softer than she expected. "But it's more than that. It's a test. A step into a world most people are too scared to see." She swallowed hard, trying to steady her racing thoughts. "A test?" she asked, trying to mask her curiosity with caution. "Yes," he said, his tone deliberate, each word weighted with authority and something deeper, something dangerous. "I need to know if you can handle the shadows, the secrets, and the games. Because once you see too much, there's no turning back." Lila felt a shiver run down her spine. Shadows and secrets, these were words that had fascinated her since she first learned about Damian, but hearing them directly from him made the stakes feel frighteningly real. "And if I can't?" she asked, trying to maintain her composure while secretly hoping the challenge would pull her closer. Damian's gaze softened, just for a moment, though the intensity never left his eyes. "Then you leave, unscathed, wiser, and unharmed," he said. "But something tells me you won't walk away." Lila could only nod, caught between caution and curiosity, between fear and excitement. He gestured toward the edge of the rooftop, where the city lights stretched endlessly below them, twinkling like stars scattered across the earth. "Look at it," he said. "The city, the power, the people. Most don't notice what's really happening beneath the surface. But you have eyes to see, instincts to feel, and courage to step further." She followed his gaze, feeling the pull of the unknown, the allure of the forbidden, and the magnetic energy that emanated from him. "Why me?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. Damian's smile was subtle, almost inscrutable, but it carried the weight of an answer she both feared and craved. "Because you're not afraid to see," he said simply. "And because, despite your caution, your curiosity will always win." They stood in silence for a moment, the night air heavy with anticipation. Then, unexpectedly, Damian leaned closer, so close that the warmth of his body brushed against hers. "There's something you should know," he said, voice dropping to a whisper. "Everything you think you understand about me, it's only the beginning. And everything you fear, it's exactly what you need to confront." Her heart pounded, her breath catching in her throat. "And, what do you want from me?" she asked, the words barely audible. Damian's lips curved into that faint, teasing smile that made her shiver. "To see how far you're willing to go. To see if you can survive the game, and maybe, just maybe, enjoy it along the way." She felt her knees weaken, a mix of excitement, fear, and something undeniably magnetic drawing her closer. The city below seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them on the rooftop, caught in a dangerous orbit of tension and attraction. Then, without warning, Damian's hand brushed lightly against hers, not a touch, not a caress, just enough to ignite every nerve ending, enough to make her pulse spike and her mind whirl. "Do you trust me?" he asked, his voice soft, but carrying the weight of a challenge. Lila hesitated, the answer hanging in the air. She had no idea where this was leading, no idea how far the night, and Damian, would push her. But something inside her stirred, a mix of daring and desire she couldn't ignore. I think I do," she admitted finally, her voice trembling slightly. Damian's eyes softened, just for a fleeting second, before that sharp, calculated edge returned. "Good," he said, "because trust is only the first step. The real test is coming." Lila's mind raced as she tried to prepare for whatever game he had planned next. She had already been pulled deeper than she expected, caught in the pull of his power, his allure, and the dangerous thrill of the unknown. And yet, despite the fear and uncertainty, she knew with absolute clarity that she couldn't turn away. Damian Cross was more than a boss, more than a mystery, he was a storm she was already entangled in, and no matter how careful she tried to be, she was swept along, powerless against the gravity of his world. That night, as she left the rooftop and returned to her apartment, her thoughts were a whirlwind of anticipation, desire, and caution. Every shadow, every secret, every unspoken word between her and Damian was a thread pulling her into a world she had never imagined, a world of power, danger, and undeniable temptation. And deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. Damian Cross had opened a door she could never close, and no matter how much she wanted to resist, she was already a part of his game, and he was already a part of her mind in ways she couldn't escape. The following days were a whirlwind for Lila, each one a careful balance between work and the undercurrent of tension that Damian had introduced into her life. Every step she took in the office felt like walking on a tightrope, aware that Damian's gaze could land on her at any moment, aware that every interaction carried a weight she couldn't quite define. She tried to focus on her tasks, but her mind kept replaying the moments from the rooftop, his hand brushing hers, the weight of his voice when he asked if she trusted him, the intensity of his stare that seemed to pierce through her carefully maintained composure. Each memory made her pulse race and her thoughts scatter, and yet, there was something thrilling about it, something dangerously addictive. Then came a meeting that changed the rhythm of her week completely. Damian had summoned her personally, and as she entered his office, she noticed that his demeanor was different, calculated, deliberate, yet with a teasing undertone that made her uneasy and excited at the same time. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. She obeyed instinctively, her heart hammering in her chest. "We're going to play a little game tonight," he continued, voice low, smooth, and magnetic. "A game of closeness, observation, and trust. Do you think you can handle that?" Lila blinked, unsure whether to be flattered or terrified. "A game?" she asked cautiously. Damian nodded, leaning back, his piercing eyes never leaving hers. "Yes. You see, most people underestimate the value of proximity, of observing, of noticing details others miss. But you have a sharp eye. A mind that notices subtle shifts. And that's why I chose you." Lila swallowed hard. She knew there was no casual game with Damian Cross, everything was layered, calculated, and potentially dangerous. And yet, a part of her thrilled at the challenge, at the idea of being pulled further into his world. What kind of game?" she asked, her voice steady even as her pulse raced. Damian leaned forward slightly, the intensity in his gaze making her stomach twist. "A game of closeness," he said simply. "We'll spend the evening together in different settings, but not just physically close, emotionally, mentally. I want to see how you react, how you adapt, how you handle the tension between curiosity and caution." Lila's mind spun. This wasn't about wine or dinner or casual conversation, it was about being tested, challenged, and drawn into his world in ways she couldn't yet understand. But a part of her, the daring, impulsive part she rarely let surface, wanted nothing more than to rise to the challenge. That evening, she found herself following his instructions with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. They moved through the city, visiting exclusive spots she had never been allowed into before, dimly lit art galleries where whispers of deals and secrets hung in the air, high-rise lounges with panoramic views of the skyline, quiet rooftop gardens that felt removed from reality entirely. With each location, Damian observed her reactions carefully, noting the subtle flickers of excitement, hesitation, or curiosity in her expressions. Lila found herself walking the edge of fear and fascination, feeling alive in a way she hadn't in years. At one rooftop, with the city lights stretching endlessly beneath them, Damian leaned slightly closer, so that the warmth of his body brushed hers. "Notice everything," he whispered, voice low, teasing, and magnetic. "Every detail, every movement, every reaction, it all matters." Her pulse spiked. The closeness, the intimacy of the moment, was intoxicating, yet terrifying. She tried to maintain composure, but the subtle electricity between them made it nearly impossible. I notice," she murmured. Barely audible. He smiled, just enough to show approval without breaking the magnetic tension between them. "Good. You're paying attention. That's how you survive in this world, Lila. By observing, by learning, by adapting." The night stretched on, each encounter more intense than the last. In a private lounge, they sat across from each other, conversation a careful dance between playful teasing and subtle probing. Damian asked questions that seemed simple on the surface but were loaded with meaning, designed to reveal layers of her personality she hadn't shared with anyone. Lila found herself answering honestly, unable to resist the pull of his curiosity and the challenge embedded in his gaze. By the end of the evening, she was exhausted, mentally and emotionally, yet exhilarated in a way she had never felt before. Damian's eyes lingered on her as they returned to his office, a silent acknowledgement of the game they had just played and the tension that had built between them. "You did well," he said softly, almost a whisper, as if the words themselves carried weight far beyond their meaning. "You handled the closeness, the observation, and the tension better than most people would. But remember, this is only the beginning. There's much more to come, and the stakes are higher than you realize." Lila nodded, her mind a whirlwind of emotions. She felt proud, exhilarated, and deeply aware of the dangerous attraction building between them. Damian was more than a boss, more than a mystery, he was a storm she was being pulled into, and no matter how careful she tried to be, she was already caught in the gravity of his world. As she left the office that night, walking through the quiet, dimly lit corridors, she realized something: this game, this challenge, was far more dangerous than she had anticipated. But it was also intoxicating, thrilling, and impossible to resist. She knew that Damian Cross had opened a door she could never close, and every interaction, every glance, every subtle touch was pulling her deeper into his orbit. And as she stepped out into the night air, the city skyline stretching endlessly before her, she felt a mix of fear, desire, and anticipation. The game of closeness had begun, and she knew with certainty that it would change her life forever. Damian Cross was not just a boss, a mystery, or a challenge, he was the storm she was now willingly chasing, and there was no turning back. Every heartbeat, every breath, every thought was consumed by the knowledge that their story was only just beginning, and that the dangerous, intoxicating dance between them would escalate in ways she couldn't yet imagine. The pull between them was undeniable, the stakes higher than ever, and the secrets and shadows of Damian's world waiting to be revealed, one calculated move, one daring step at a time. The morning after the game of closeness, Lila found it nearly impossible to concentrate. Every task she attempted to complete felt mundane compared to the electric tension of the night before. Even the faint sound of Damian's footsteps in the hallway sent shivers down her spine, her senses instantly alert. She knew that something between them had shifted, though she wasn't entirely sure what it meant or where it would lead. Damian, of course, seemed entirely unaffected, or perhaps he was a master at hiding the turmoil he stirred in her, maintaining the calm, controlled exterior that made him so terrifyingly magnetic. Later that afternoon, he summoned her again, and this time, the invitation carried a weight that made her pulse quicken with anticipation and nervousness. The office was empty except for the two of them, and the dim lighting lent the space an intimate, almost private aura. "Close the door," he instructed softly, a subtle command that made her obey without hesitation. Lila did, feeling the air shift around them the moment the door clicked shut. Damian leaned against his desk, watching her with that familiar intensity that made her feel simultaneously exposed and alive. "You've been thinking about last night," he said casually, though she could hear the underlying certainty in his voice. "About the closeness, the observation, the tension." She flushed, caught completely off guard. I suppose I have," she admitted, unable to hide the truth. Damian's eyes softened, just for a fraction of a second, before the sharp, teasing edge returned. "Good," he said. "I want honesty from you, Lila. Always. There's no place for pretense in my world." She nodded, her heart racing. I don't know what's happening between us," she confessed, her voice trembling slightly. "But I can't stop thinking about you." The admission hung in the air, heavy with tension, and for a moment, the world seemed to shrink to just the two of them. Damian's lips curved into a faint smile, approving yet controlled, a smile that spoke of both power and curiosity. "You feel the pull," he said quietly. "The tension, the challenge, the danger. And yet, you're drawn in anyway." Her pulse spiked. How did he always seem to see through her, to unravel her thoughts with a few carefully chosen words? "Yes," she admitted, almost in a whisper. "I can't help it. You're impossible to ignore." Damian moved closer, his presence overwhelming, the subtle scent of his cologne wrapping around her like a challenge she couldn't refuse. "And that's exactly why this is dangerous," he said. "Because desire, curiosity, and fear, they all mix in ways that can make people do reckless things." She felt the word settle in her mind, and yet, a dangerous thrill ran through her. The thought of being drawn further into his world, of testing boundaries and discovering hidden layers of both him and herself, was irresistible. I'm willing," she said finally, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination. "I want to see where this goes." Damian's smile widened slightly, just enough to reveal a glimpse of satisfaction. "Good," he said. "Because I need to know the truth, Lila. I need to know if you can face the shadows, the secrets, and the games that come with this world, and with me." Her heartbeat quickened at the weight of his words. She knew that what they were about to embark on was more than just flirtation or intrigue, it was a dance along the edge of danger and desire, a test of trust, courage, and honesty that could shift everything between them. Then, unexpectedly, Damian stepped even closer, so near that the warmth of his body brushed against hers, and she felt an electric charge shoot through her. "There's something I need to confess," he said softly, almost hesitantly, though his eyes remained intense, unwavering. Lila's breath caught in her throat. "A confession," she repeated, curiosity and apprehension warring in her chest. Damian nodded, the rare vulnerability in his expression making her chest tighten. "Yes," he said. "I'm not just testing you, Lila. I'm not just observing. I'm drawn to you, more than I expected, more than I should allow myself to be." Her pulse raced so violently she was certain he could feel it. The words, the admission, made her both terrified and exhilarated. "You, what?" she whispered, almost afraid to believe it. Damian's gaze softened, yet the controlled intensity never left his eyes. "I didn't plan for this," he admitted. "I didn't plan to be affected by you. But I am. Every glance, every reaction, every word, it pulls me in, and I can't resist." Lila felt her knees weaken, her chest tightening with a mixture of fear, anticipation, and a dangerous thrill. Damian Cross, the untouchable, heartless, magnetic force she had whispered about in the hallway, was confessing a vulnerability that made her pulse spike and her thoughts scatter. I feel the same," she whispered, the words spilling out before caution could stop them. "I can't stop thinking about you, either." For a moment, the world around them seemed to vanish. The office, the city, the rules, they all faded into the background, leaving just the two of them, bound by an unspoken attraction that was impossible to deny. Damian's hand brushed lightly against hers, not a touch, not a caress, just a fleeting contact that sent shivers down her spine. "Then we have to be careful," he said softly, his voice low and magnetic. "Because once we allow this to go further, there's no turning back. This world, my world, it's complicated, dangerous, and consuming. Are you ready for that, Lila?" She swallowed hard, heart hammering, mind racing. I don't know, she admitted honestly, but I want to try. I want to see where this goes. Damian's rare smile returned, just a flicker, but it carried both approval and the promise of danger. Good, he said, because desire, attraction, and trust, they're all part of the game now. And the game is only going to get more intense. That night, as Lila left the office, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions: fear, desire, curiosity, and exhilaration. She knew that Damian Cross had drawn her into a world far more complex and intoxicating than she had ever imagined. Every glance, every word, every subtle movement between them was a calculated step in a dangerous dance neither could ignore. And as she walked through the quiet city streets, the weight of his confession lingering in her mind, she realized something undeniable: Damian Cross was no longer just a boss, a mystery, or a challenge. He was the storm she was chasing, the fire she couldn't escape, and the dangerous thrill she was already hopelessly addicted to. The game had shifted, the stakes had risen, and there was no turning back. Every heartbeat, every breath, every thought now belonged to the tension, the desire, and the secrets they were both unraveling, one daring step at a time. The days following Damian's confession were a blur of tension, desire, and careful observation for Lila. Each interaction with him felt like navigating a labyrinth filled with hidden dangers and unspoken rules. The office, once familiar, now seemed charged with electricity, each glance, each fleeting touch carrying more weight than she had ever imagined. Her colleagues noticed the subtle shift, whispering about her newfound confidence, unaware of the storm brewing between her and the enigmatic Damian Cross. He remained the same in appearance, controlled, impeccable, untouchable, but the way he observed her now, the way his piercing blue eyes lingered just a moment too long, revealed a different layer, one that made her pulse race and her mind spin. Then came the unexpected, a warning from someone she had never spoken to before, a whispered caution in the hall that made her stomach twist. "Be careful," the voice said, barely audible, but the fear underlying the words was unmistakable. "He's not who you think he is, or maybe he's exactly who you think, but the game he plays is deadly." Lila froze, the echo of the warning lingering in her mind. She wasn't sure if it was meant to frighten her or protect her, but it planted a seed of unease she couldn't shake. That evening, she found herself standing outside Damian's office, hesitating, her heart pounding. She had to see him, had to understand the tension between them, the attraction, and the danger that seemed to swirl around him like a storm. When she finally entered, Damian looked up from his desk, his expression calm, unreadable, yet carrying that subtle spark of amusement that made her knees weak. "You're late," he said casually, though the twinkle in his eyes suggested he noticed the hesitation in her step. I needed a moment," she admitted, trying to steady her breathing. "A moment to think." Damian leaned back, steepling his fingers, studying her as if trying to read her mind. "Thinking can be dangerous," he said softly, almost teasingly. "Especially when it comes to me." Lila swallowed hard. He was right, of course. Every thought about him, every decision to step closer, carried the weight of risk and desire intertwined. "I can't help it," she whispered, her voice trembling. I want to understand. I want to know you, all of you." Damian's gaze softened, briefly, revealing a flicker of something vulnerable beneath the polished, untouchable exterior he always maintained. "And that's exactly why this is risky," he said. "Because when you know me, when you see the layers, the shadows, the danger, it changes everything. And there's no going back from that." He rose from his chair, closing the distance between them, and Lila felt the pull of his presence like gravity. "Do you trust me, Lila?" he asked, voice low and magnetic. The question was not rhetorical, and she understood the weight behind it. I think I do," she admitted, her heartbeat racing. "I want to." A faint, approving smile touched his lips, and he extended his hand, not to touch, but to gesture toward a sleek black folder on his desk. "There's something you need to see," he said. "Something that will test your instincts, your courage, and your ability to handle the shadows of my world." Lila's pulse quickened as she approached the desk and opened the folder. Inside were photographs, documents, and detailed notes about people, places, and events she had never imagined existed in her everyday life. The level of control, the meticulous planning, and the hidden dangers revealed a world entirely different from the polished exterior of the company she knew. "This," Damian said, voice calm yet carrying a subtle intensity, "is my world. And it's not for the faint of heart. These are the truths most people never see. And I need to know if you can handle them, without fear, without hesitation, and without losing yourself." Lila's hands trembled slightly as she examined the contents. She realized that Damian Cross was far more complex, far more dangerous, and far more powerful than she had even suspected. And yet, the curiosity, the thrill, the undeniable attraction drew her in, closer and closer, against every instinct screaming caution. I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered, though the spark of determination in her eyes betrayed her hesitation. Damian stepped closer, the faint scent of his cologne enveloping her, the warmth of his presence both comforting and electrifying. "You're already in it, Lila," he said softly. "Whether you realize it or not, you've stepped into my world, and now there's no turning back. The question isn't whether you're ready, it's whether you're willing to see it through." Her chest tightened, heart hammering, mind racing. She understood that every choice, every glance, every moment with him was a step deeper into a game of power, desire, and danger. I want to try," she admitted finally, voice steady despite the racing thoughts. "I want to see everything, with you." Damian's rare, approving smile returned, fleeting yet powerful. "Good," he said, "because this isn't just a game anymore. The pull between us, the tension, the attraction, it's now part of the stakes. And the deeper we go, the higher the risk, and the more consuming the game becomes." That night, Lila left the office with her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The warning she had received, the revelations in the folder, and Damian's magnetic presence all swirled together in a mix of fear, desire, and exhilaration. She realized, with a clarity that both thrilled and terrified her, that she had already crossed the threshold. Damian Cross was not just her boss, not just a mystery, he was a force, a storm, and she was drawn into his orbit, willingly and irreversibly. As she walked through the quiet city streets, the lights reflecting in her eyes like sparks of the danger and excitement she now craved, she understood something undeniable: this was no longer about curiosity or attraction alone. It was a test of courage, of trust, and of the ability to navigate the shadows and secrets that surrounded Damian. And despite the fear, the tension, and the danger, she was ready. She was ready to face whatever came next in the intoxicating, perilous world that Damian Cross commanded, and she knew, deep in her heart, that there was no turning back from the pull that now bound them together. The night had arrived, the night that Lila knew would change everything. The air was heavy with anticipation as she approached Damian's office, her steps cautious yet filled with a reckless sort of excitement. The city outside sparkled like a sea of stars, but inside, the tension between them was more electric, more consuming than any view could ever be. Damian was waiting, as always, calm, controlled, but with that faint glimmer in his eyes that suggested he was as affected by her presence as she was by his. "You came," he said softly, almost a statement rather than a question, his voice low and magnetic. Lila's pulse raced. "I told you I would," she replied, voice steady but betraying the flutter in her chest. He leaned back in his chair, watching her as if she were both a puzzle and a challenge, and the way he looked at her made the air feel thick, charged, and impossible to ignore. "Tonight," he said, "everything changes. What happens between us now will determine how far this goes, and how deep the pull becomes. Are you ready, Lila?" She nodded, even as her heartbeat pounded violently against her ribs. I think I am," she whispered, the words almost lost in the intensity of the moment. Damian stood and stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the best possible way. The tension between them was palpable, a magnetic energy that drew them together despite all caution, all reason, all rules. "Good," he said, voice low, roughened slightly by emotion he rarely revealed. "Because desire, trust, and danger, they're all part of the storm you're stepping into. And once it begins, there's no turning back." Her pulse raced at his words, her body responding even as her mind screamed for caution. But the attraction, the tension, the undeniable connection was impossible to resist. Damian moved even closer, the faint scent of his cologne wrapping around her, and for a fleeting moment, Lila felt as if the world had narrowed to just the two of them. "There's something you need to know," he said softly, his eyes locking with hers in a gaze so intense it left her breathless. "Everything I've shown you, everything I've revealed, it's only the surface. There are layers, shadows, and truths that most people never see. And now, I want you to see them with me, to understand, to be part of this world that's as consuming as it is dangerous." Lila swallowed hard, her heartbeat accelerating. She had already glimpsed the edges of this world, had already been pulled into the game of closeness, observation, and trust. And yet, the promise of deeper secrets, greater tension, and more intense connection thrilled her in a way she couldn't resist. I want to see," she whispered, stepping just slightly closer. Damian's rare, approving smile returned, and he reached for her hand, not touching fully, just a gentle brush that sent shivers down her spine and set her pulse racing even faster. "Good," he said softly. "Because tonight, nothing remains hidden. The game, the attraction, the tension, it's all coming to the surface. And we face it together." The evening unfolded like a carefully orchestrated storm. Damian led her through hidden corridors of the office she had never noticed, into private rooms where secrets, documents, and glimpses of a world of power, manipulation, and hidden deals lay in plain sight. Each revelation was both thrilling and terrifying, pulling her deeper into his orbit, showing her that his life, his power, and his allure were far more complex than she had ever imagined. And through it all, the tension between them grew, simmering beneath the surface, building until it was impossible to ignore. Every glance, every subtle touch, every whispered word carried the weight of desire and danger intertwined. Damian watched her reactions carefully, testing her courage, her instincts, her ability to navigate both the shadows of his world and the magnetic pull that bound them together. At one moment, in the quiet of a dimly lit lounge high above the city, Damian stepped closer, so close that their breaths mingled, and the warmth of his presence wrapped around her like a challenge she couldn't resist. "Do you feel it?" he whispered, his voice low, magnetic, and rough with emotion he rarely revealed. "The pull between us, the storm that's building." Lila nodded, heart pounding, lips slightly parted, unable to deny the truth. "Yes," she whispered. "I feel it. I can't ignore it." He smiled faintly, approvingly, and reached out to gently tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, a small, intimate gesture that sent sparks of electricity through her. "Good," he said, "because this is real, Lila. More real than anything you've felt before. And the storm, the danger, the desire, it's only going to grow." The night seemed to stretch endlessly as they moved closer, their words and gestures a careful dance of teasing, testing, and confession. Lila realized that she had crossed a line she couldn't return from, that Damian had drawn her into a world where attraction, tension, and trust were all intertwined with danger, power, and hidden truths. And yet, for the first time in her life, she felt fully alive, fully present, and completely consumed by the intensity of the connection between them. Then came the moment that changed everything. Damian stepped closer, his hand lightly brushing hers once again, and his gaze softened in a way that made her chest tighten. "Lila," he whispered, voice low, magnetic, and almost vulnerable. "I don't just want to test you, observe you, or play games. I want you, fully. And I need to know if you want me to." Her breath caught. The confession, the vulnerability, and the intensity of the moment left her reeling. She realized, with clarity and undeniable certainty, that she wanted him just as much, that the pull, the tension, the storm they shared was a force she could no longer resist. I want you," she admitted, voice trembling, heart racing, mind spinning. Damian's rare, approving smile returned, and for the first time, the controlled, untouchable man seemed to let the storm of his own emotions surface. "Good," he whispered, closing the distance between them finally, letting their hands meet fully, fingers entwining, and pulling her gently into a closeness that made the world outside fade into nothingness. The city lights, the office, the world, they all disappeared as they stood together, connected by desire, trust, and the storm of emotions they had built together over weeks of tension, testing, and discovery. Damian's lips brushed hers softly, tentatively at first, then with growing intensity as the attraction between them ignited fully. Lila responded, giving herself over to the pull, to the desire, to the storm that neither of them could resist. The night was theirs, a culmination of tension, attraction, danger, and trust, and in that moment, the complex, magnetic, and untouchable Damian Cross was no longer just a mystery or a challenge. He was the man who had drawn her into a world of intrigue, desire, and intensity, and she had chosen to step fully into it. And as the night stretched on, their hearts beating in sync, their breaths mingling, and their connection deepening, Lila realized one undeniable truth: the storm between them was unstoppable, consuming, and utterly intoxicating, and she wouldn't have it any other way.